You know, have you ever just stopped and looked around at the roads, the parks, the cities, and really wondered, how did this all get here? It's easy to think of our surroundings as just, well, a backdrop, right? But what if I told you it's not there by accident at all? That every single landscape has a story, and more importantly, a writer.
It's a pretty strange question, isn't it? Who wrote my street? But that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. Think of us as detectives. We're on the hunt for the hidden authors of our environment. Because really, the world around us is like a giant book, and someone is always holding the pen.
All right, so let's dive right in. The very first clue, the first thing we absolutely have to get our heads around, is that landscapes are never just scenery. No way. They are stories, literally written in dirt and concrete. And you know what those stories are almost always about? Power.
And that is the absolute core idea here. I mean, a park isn't just a park. A highway is never just a road. They are the physical result of conflicts, of big decisions, and of detailed plans. And they actively guide us, you know? They tell us where to walk, where it's okay to live, and sometimes, in very subtle ways, they tell us where we don't belong.
Okay, so if these are stories, how in the world do we read them? Well, like any good investigator, we need a tool. And our number one tool for this job is this really powerful concept called a landscape biography. It's actually a pretty simple idea, but it's brilliant. It's asking us to think of a landscape as, well, as having a life of its own, just like a person does. It's not some static, finished object. It's a world in formation, something that's constantly being shaped by all the lives that are lived within it.
Yeah, and this quote from the geographer Marwin Samuels just hits the nail on the head. Landscapes without authors are like books without writers. It tells us that nothing is accidental. Someone or some group of people made a decision that resulted in the physical world you're looking at right now. And our job? It's to figure out who.
So a really great way to think about doing this is the onion metaphor, right? To get to what's really going on today, you have to peel back the layers. You start with the most basic stuff, the physical land, the geology. Then you peel back to the next layer, all the historical tracks people have left behind. Then another layer, the modern plans and designs. And when you've peeled all that back, you finally get to the core, the story of how power is being fought over, right here, right now.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you start looking for these authors, you figure out pretty fast that there's almost never just one. In fact, most landscapes are the result of a big battle between competing authors, all of them trying to write their own version of the story right onto the land itself.
Okay, check out this case study, because it's fascinating. We're talking about the Icelandic highlands. The first roads there, they weren't designed by engineers with blueprints. Nope. They were literally written into the landscape by the first people to drive across it in jeeps. The technology, the simple automobile, is what allowed them to become the first authors, physically carving their story into the earth with tire tracks. And what's so wild is how you have these two completely different scripts for the exact same place. On one hand, you've got the Jeep enthusiasts. For them, the highlands are all about frelsi, the freedom to travel. Driving across the land is an act of liberty. But then, on the other hand, you have conservationists who see that exact same action as pure destruction of a fragile ecosystem. And this wasn't just some polite debate, you know? It led to actual physical conflict and protests played out right there in the landscape.
But here's the thing. Authorship isn't just for powerful planners or people in big jeeps. Think about something you've definitely seen. That worn-down path in the grass that cuts a corner in a park. They're called desire paths, and they are written by the silent authors of the city. We're talking about everyday walkers and residents whose daily routines physically change the landscape, even if it's in these small, unofficial ways.
So this brings us to a really crucial point. Why do people fight so hard to be the ones who write the landscape? Well, it's because landscapes aren't just stories, they're arguments. They are incredibly powerful tools for enforcing social norms and telling everyone what a society is supposed to value.
This gets into a concept called the normative landscape. So what does that mean? It means the physical world around us is constantly sending us signals about what's normal or what ought to be. It has the power to make really big social divisions, things like segregation, seem totally natural and inevitable, just because they're literally built into the concrete and the grass around us.
Let me give you a really powerful and kind of chilling example of this. So take a look at Thoroughbred Park in Lexington, Kentucky. On the surface, it's exactly what it looks like, a beautiful public space. It's designed to celebrate the city's famous horse racing culture, and it's got these lovely statues and these big, rolling green hills.
But remember our job here. We're detectives, and every good story has its secrets. So you have to ask, what hidden story is this landscape telling? What is this seemingly innocent park actually doing? What is its design trying to hide from us?
And the reality? It's absolutely staggering. Those beautiful rolling hills, they weren't natural. Not at all. They were man-made. They were strategically designed and placed to physically block the view of an adjacent, poor, predominantly black neighborhood from the main road that leads into the city. Think about that. The landscape itself was actively working to make an entire community invisible. It was reinforcing a social hierarchy by literally erasing people from the scenery.
This just goes to show you that the same physical spot can be a radically different place depending on who's looking at it. The geographer D.W. Meinig famously said that any one scene has at least 10 different versions. I mean, for a scientist, it might be a system of hydrology and ecology. For a developer, it's all about wealth and resource potential. For a resident, it's a home, a place filled with memories. It's not just a different opinion, it's a fundamentally different landscape for each of them.
So why does all of this matter? What's the big takeaway? Well, it matters because if we can learn how to read a landscape's biography, we can actually use that knowledge to write better, more inclusive next chapters for the places we all live in.
You know, one of the biggest problems in modern planning is the creation of these generic, placeless developments that could be anywhere. They have zero connection to the local identity. But the solution is right there. By using this biographical approach, planners can become investigators themselves. They can uncover the deep story of a place before they even think about drawing up new plans.
And here is a fantastic example of this in action. In one region of the Netherlands, these beautiful, old wooden fences were disappearing, getting replaced by generic metal ones. Now, instead of just trying to preserve the old fences like museum pieces, planners decided to study their biography. And what did they find? They discovered that for generations, farmers had built them using bricolage, basically just improvising with whatever wood they had available. So the outcome? The new fence designs were based on that very practice of improvisation, which kept the living story of the landscape alive.
So, the next time you walk down your own street, I want you to try and see it differently. Don't just see it as a backdrop, see it as a book. Ask yourself, what story is this place telling me? Who were the authors who wrote it? And maybe most importantly, whose story is being erased or just plain left out of the narrative? Because every single landscape has a biography. And now, you got the tools to start reading it.